What is going on YouTube and Diablo fans? My name's Andreas, and as always, welcome back to Mana and Motherboards. So with the Season 14 ladder right around the corner and coming up this weekend, I thought that I would try and come up with a Warlock build tier list for all the meta and current and good builds that I think will be played in the upcoming Season 14 this Friday or Saturday, depending where you are in the world. So before jumping into this tier list, I just wanted to say that these are just my opinions based upon my testing as well as my community's testing, and things might shift and change around a little bit once the season kicks off and actually starts. So just take any of the information that I share here with a grain of salt, and it is ultimately just my opinion. So let's kick things right off, starting with the leveling builds for the Warlock. So at the Warlock's disposal, I think there are quite a few good leveling builds, and we'll start off at the bottom at sort of your worst or not as good leveling builds, and then we'll work our way to the best ones. So at the bottom in D tier over here, I have the Mirrored Blades Warlock, and that's because Mirrored Blades is a fantastic skill at single target, but it really does lack a bit of AoE and the ability to clear big mobs and groups of monsters. So that really hampers your progression in terms of being able to clear whatever sort of area and zone you are playing in, and that just really reduces the speed of what this build is capable of. So while it does great single target damage, it is just incredibly slow at progression when there are bigger, larger packs of monsters. Then alongside in the D tier for these leveling builds is the Echoing Strike Warlock that focuses on putting all of your points and synergies into Hex Purge. So this build is much better later game once you already have some skill levels stored up and you are able to max the synergies and max out Hex Purge and Mirrored Blades and all of those sorts of things. So it's really not so much of an early or starter build. It really only comes online later on. So while you can play this leveling and during your playthrough, I don't think it is really actually all that effective, and that is why it's all the way down in the D tier. It could maybe even go to the D minus tier. We don't have any F tier at the moment. I don't think it's kind of necessary. Those are just sort of any builds that don't really work currently or aren't worth mentioning for this tier list. So Echoing Strike, the Hex Purge variant, could go down in D minus, maybe even F tier. We'll actually just put that down in D minus later on. Anyway, moving on from your D tier to your D plus tier, we have the Cleave Warlock, and this is quite an exciting, quite a fun skill, but it does take a bit of gear and a bit of sort of skills to really get going and feeling comfortable. So I wouldn't recommend it really as a starter build. If it is one of your favorite skills and you really like the playstyle, the visuals, all of that sort of stuff, it is good enough, but that is why we've put it at D plus tier. It has fair AoE for the type of melee skill that it is, but it does require a fair bit of gear to really feel comfortable and strong, and it's just not really on par with a lot of the other builds that that the Warlock has at its disposal. So moving on to the C tier, we now have the Echoing Strike Warlock, and this is the physical variant. So this is the variation of the build where you will put all your skill points into Echoing Strike, into Mirrored Blades, into Blade Warp, into all your synergies and stuff, and focus on the physical portion of Echoing Strike damage. And we have that in the C tier here because early on playing this build as a starter, its damage is quite single target focused, so again you struggle with that AoE aspect of clearing and playing your way through the game. So it really sort of lacks clear speed and AoE, and it only really starts to come online with more gear as you are progressing later in the game. So that's why we have it down at C tier. It really doesn't work the best as a sort of starter build. It takes a while to come online, and yeah, while it is usable and workable, I wouldn't personally really recommend it to anyone unless it's something that they really want to play and really enjoy playing and really like that skill and build in particular. So moving up to the B tier, we have the Summon Goatman Warlock, or Summon Goatmen Warlock, and this is a cool summon style warlock build, and it is nice in the fact that it is a summon build, so you can stay out of the fray and in the back lines, staying safe, staying sort of healthy, staying survivable, and let your minions do the work for you. The Goatmen have Crushing Blow, which works really nicely against bosses, so it's great for your act bosses on the playthrough, and in general they are pretty good summons. And you do also have your death mark to position and place them where you need, and it just generally works pretty well doing a Summon Goatman build. You can even use Defiler with it, you can use a Bound Demon. There's quite a few variations, and it's quite sort of versatile in the playthrough. It is again lacking a little bit of AoE, but it is strong enough to sort of look past that or not really require so much AoE damage, because the kill speed is pretty fair with the Goatman, that they can just sort of move from one monster to the next relatively fast, and it does physical damage, so you don't really encounter many immunes on your playthrough, and in general it's quite a decent early leveling build for the Warlock. And then moving up from there, we have from the B- tier with the Summon Goatman Warlock, we then have the Blood Boil Warlock, and this build used to be a lot better during the playthrough and early on when its radius was much bigger, but with the current sort of nerfs to the Blood Boil skill, with the radius being greatly reduced for the skill, it's not quite as strong as it used to be as a leveling build, but it is still fairly decent, with you having dual elements of physical and fire damage, which allows you to play a lot easier in Hull, dealing with immunities, and in general you do have your death mark, which allows you to position your demons and just give you quite a lot of versatility. So I'd put it just above Summon Goatman, and it is overall quite a decent leveling build and a sort of playthrough build, and even with the nerfs it's still in a relatively good spot, but not quite there in the A tier or even S tier. Moving on into the A tier, we have the Summon Tainted Warlock. Now this takes a couple levels to get online, as you can only use Summon Tainted at level 12, but up until that point, using your Goatman with points into Demonic Mastery and some of the other skills that you pick up along the way, it is very effective, and it deals with immunities really well, being able to use Blood Boil for that physical portion of damage to deal with immunes, and doing a ton of fire damage during the playthrough. You can easily play this on players 8, and your Tainted, even with the nerfs to the skill in the season 14 and coming patch, it is still a very incredibly powerful skill, and you deal a ton of damage. You do have Blood Boil to lean back on, you do have a lot of versatility, utility with where you can position and place your demons with Deathmark, and in general it's a really strong summon build that has a really fun playstyle and is just really effective. So I think placing it at A tier is just a sort of solid positioning for it, because it's a lot better than the other builds that we mentioned, but not quite as good as the top leveling builds for the Warlock. So moving on to the S tier, we have the Miasma or Abyss Warlock. And this build in general is just really fantastic because it does magic damage. It's a caster build, it can scale or faster cast rate, it doesn't need incredible gear to get going, and it just really doesn't struggle very much at all with immunities being magic damage in its nature. So the Miasma Abyss Warlock is a fantastic starter build. even from level 1, your Miasma Bolt is incredibly powerful. Moving into Miasma Chains with the reworks to mechanics and how the whole skill works in Season 14, I think it's going to be incredible for the leveling process. It's just all around very strong. It sort of scales very linearly throughout the game, even into the end game. You can play it from level 1, not have to change a thing, and just play it on and on and on, growing and developing and just sort of progressing at a steady rate. It is a really, really fun, really visually appealing and pleasing build to play, and I think overall it's just great. And it's only edged out by the Fire Apocalypse Warlock very slightly, in my opinion. They should almost be on par in S tier over here, but I think the Fire Warlock just edges out a tiny bit. And even with the nerfs that they did to Ring of Fire and some of the other skills for the Fire Apocalypse Warlock, it still is just incredibly powerful in Normal and Nightmare. You really blast through Normal and Nightmare faster than any other Warlock build currently. And it's only when you get to Hull you hit a bit of a brick wall with the Apocalypse Warlock. And this is where then Miasma sort of catches up and then comes into its own, where Fire just sort of really struggles as you hit Hull, and you need to either use your mercenary, play in a group, or other things like that in order to deal with Fire Immune. So you will blast through Normal and Nightmare faster than any other Warlock build up until that point, but as soon as you hit Hull, Abyss is just a bit better. So that's again why I put them almost on the same level, same tier, in that Miasma and Abyss isn't as fast during Normal and Nightmare, but then it's faster in Hull than the Fire Warlock, and the Fire Warlock is faster in Normal and Nightmare, but not quite as fast in Hull. So those are our Warlock leveling builds and our sort of ranking and tier list for that. I'd love to know what build you are thinking of starting for the new Season 14. Please let me know in the comments below, and we will now have a look at the overall endgame tier list. So these are going to be the top builds in the endgame for the Warlock in Season 14, and I also think the most popular builds that people are going to be playing. And we're going to start off at the bottom again for this overall endgame tier list. Just as a little disclaimer, we're not going to be doing a bossing tier list specifically, we're not going to be doing a terrorized zone tier list specifically, or even like an elite sniper tier list. We're just going to focus on the end game as an overall sort of package and how these builds deal with all content in the end game. I think getting into the nitty gritty of like either like a specific boss killer or stuff like that, that really sort of depends on what you want to do in the end game. So I prefer to look at it as an overall end game tier list instead, just to show you what it's like playing in Hull, farming, doing bosses, doing magic finding, all of that sort of stuff. So starting off at the bottom here in the D tier, we have the Cleave Warlock, and why we have it down in the D tier is its AoE is not that fantastic, as well as it needing quite a substantial investment in gear to be effective. If you have budget gear on a Cleave Warlock, it really doesn't perform as well as you would like for an end game build. It is quite a fun build, but it does require some decent gear investment to do any sort of substantial damage. So moving on from the D tier, in the C tier, tied, so not C minus, not C plus, just regular old C tier, we have the Mirrored Blades Warlock, as well as the Mirrored Blades bow or crossbow variant of this Mirrored Blades Warlock. Now, Mirrored Blades is fantastic at bossing and fantastic at single target. You can stack on your Crushing Blow, your Deadly Strike, you have tons of leech, and you are just really good at Ubers, bossing, that sort of stuff. But where this build sort of lacks a little bit is in its AoE and sort of broader area clear speeds, and it also does take a fair amount of gear to do all types of content. You can turn it into a boss killer relatively cheaply, but if you wanted to do all forms of content, it can be a bit expensive, and again, it is slower at your areas with bigger mobs. So the bow variant of this does better at AoE clearing and more your PVM, killing lots of monsters and all of that. But then again, it is very gear dependent in order to make your bow variant or crossbow variant of this Mirrored Blades build sort of viable and in a good spot. So we have those solidly in the middle of the C tier here, and they just lack a little bit of that AoE and are just quite dependent on their gear to feel strong, and that is why we have them here in the C tier. So in the C plus tier, so almost B tier, not quite there, it could maybe move up to B tier. We'll have to just test in the new season just to really gauge where it would be, but that is where we have put the Summon Goatman Warlock. Now the Summon Goatman Warlock is very good at bossing, it's very good at single target, it's good at elite sniping if you can telestomp and you have Enigma, or even just using Deathmark. But where this build sort of falls short again is on AoE. It doesn't really have great AoE whatsoever, and to get the most out of this build there are some expensive gear requirements to really push it to its max, and that's why we only have it here at C+. It could maybe move up to B tier, but we'll have a look at that once the season starts. But overall, it's a really fun build, a really good build, but it's just not quite as good as some of the others available from other classes as well as the Warlock in general. So moving up to the B tier, solidly in the middle here, we have the Bloodboil Warlock. Now there was a big nerf to the radius and area of effect of Bloodboil. In the new Season 14, its area of effect has basically been halved, or maybe even more than half, and this sort of hurts the build quite a bit. Where it was a very solid contender in Season 13, it does move down a couple ranks and a couple notches because of that nerf to its area of effect. It's a really fun build, it really works pretty decently with budget gear, and I think in general it's just an overall solid build. Being able to deal with immunities, having that dual damage type of physical and fire, and I think it's in a good spot. It could maybe move up a little bit, or I think B tier, solid B tier is where it kind of fits and where it works at the moment. I could be wrong, we can see in the coming season, but I think that is a solid spot to put the Bloodboil Warlock at the moment. So sort of B plus tier, I think this is going to be an interesting one for a lot of people. We have the physical version of the Echoing Strike Warlock. Now I would almost put it alongside in B tier with Bloodboil, but if you have really solid gear with the Echoing Strike physical variant Warlock, you can, I think, clear a bigger variety of content than the Bloodboil Warlock, and I think that you just are a little bit more tanky, you have a little bit more damage if you have really good gear. I think for a budget setup, Bloodboil is potentially stronger than the physical Echoing Strike Warlock, but once you are in the end game, you have your gear min-max nicely. I think the Echoing Strike Warlock does come into its own a bit there, and I think being at B plus is a good spot for it. It's definitely fallen quite a few notches from Season 13, coming all the way down from an S plus tier build to now a B plus tier, and that is with that massive nerfs that it received in the PTR and the current patch, and it's sort of doing 1/10 of the damage that it used to do. And while it was wildly overpowered previously, it's now sort of more realistically, I think, where Blizzard had Echoing Strike in mind when developing the skill and build in particular. So I think I would love to be proved wrong. I'd love to see it rise among the ranks a little bit more in Season 14, but this is where I'm placing it, just because of the nerfs that occurred to it in the PTR. It's just not nearly as strong as some of the other builds and as strong as what it used to be. So just above that, edging its way into the A tier, I have the Hex Purge variant of the Echoing Strike Warlock. Now, why I have this in the A tier and above the physical variant of the Echoing Strike Warlock is because we focus heavily on Hex Purge for this variant of the build, and that makes it do a lot more magic damage than physical damage, so it gives you more of that dual element type of approach to the build, which means that you deal with immunities easier and better. With this variant, it also does a bit more damage, it has a bit better AoE, a bit better single target. It's just all around, just edges just above the physical variant of the Echoing Strike Warlock, and I think it's also slightly easier to gear for, or it is definitely easier to gear for than the physical variant. It doesn't rely on such high-end gear to actually feel good. It scales much better with gear than the physical variant, and I think it's just overall going to be the more played, more common, more sort of focused on variant of Echoing Strike in Season 14, and I think being in the A tier still makes it a really solid option, a viable option, still a very good build, but it just isn't quite as good as some of the other builds that the Warlock has on offer. So Echoing Strike has definitely dropped down a substantial amount of ranks in its standings in the sort of tier list, but it is still an A to B tier build, which I think is still a very solid position to be in, especially compared to other classes and where their sort of general builds fall. I think Echoing Strike is still pretty strong. It's just not nearly as strong as what it was before, but on that note, it was broken strong before, so I think it's in a much better spot at this point in time. So moving on from the A- tier and the Echoing Strike Hex Purge variant, we have the solid A tier Miasma or Abyss Warlock. Now, this build, in my opinion, is one of the smoothest feeling builds for the Warlock. It has a really fun playstyle. It visually looks absolutely stunning, in my opinion. Those miasma chains striking out everywhere, the dynamic sort of feel of how you can position yourself and maximize your damage through positioning, and your abyss with its sort of like sucking in mechanic and, you know, pulling in enemies, and your leaving behind of miasma trails, all of that sort of stuff, the miasma clouds. It's just a really thematically awesome Warlock build. It is probably one of my favorite builds. It was very much a top contender for my starter and sort of focus build for the coming season, and I just enjoy it a lot. Again, it's magic damage, so you don't encounter many immunes at all. It scales in a very linear way throughout the game, from playthrough all the way to endgame. It scales very well with gear, and especially with minus to enemy magic resistance and plus to magic damage, all of that sort of stuff. It is a fantastic build overall, and the only part where it falls down, in my opinion, it does also have sort of a great balance between AoE clearing as well as single target. It's a very overall balanced build, but it just falls down and sort of lacks a little bit compared to some of the other builds in the higher player count difficulty. So I think up until about players 5, the build feels really strong, really powerful, but then players 6, players 7, players 8, some of the other builds just edge ahead of it, because the Miasma and Abyss Warlock build just does not have that raw damage output that some of the other builds have on offer, and I think that's the only place where it falls down, is that it just doesn't have that raw damage. So overall, you can't go wrong with the Miasma Abyss Warlock. It is just overall a fantastic build. I mean, I put it as A tier. It could maybe even move up to A plus tier. It is just a overall really fantastic build that can do all types of content and just scales really, really well, and is really fun, really smooth, and really engaging to play. So I have a lot of good things to say about the Miasma Abyss Warlock. Moving on to the S tier and jumping quite a couple sort of levels above, we have the Summon Tainted Warlock, which is going to be my starter build for this season. It's also going to be what I'm sort of going to focus on the most. Potentially I'll also switch around and play a bit with Miasma and Fire, but my overall goal is to really focus on the Summon Tainted Warlock this season. And this build is fantastic with the bug fixes that they did in the PTR and the current sort of patch and all of that, so that the Blood Boil synergy applies its 20% bonus, which was nerfed from 30%, to the Summon Tainted, and it now does an incredible amount of damage. And this build is somewhat of a hybrid build, using Blood Boil as well as your sort of fallback skill to deal with immunities. And overall, Summon Tainted just does an incredible amount of damage. I think you'll have about 30 odd K damage per Tainted, and you can have 3 of them out at once, which kind of brings you to the realm of around 100k fire damage with these Tainted. And you have Blood Boil doing, let's say, 6k per cast of physical damage when it comes to immunities. It is a summon build, so you can stand back, let your demons do the tanking, let them do the heavy lifting, and you can just sort of stay safe, stay survivable. It gives you lots of options with your gear. It scales very well with your gear. It allows you to really focus less on your own survivability and your own sort of resistances, stats and things like that, and focus on your damage output while still staying safe. It's a great leveling build, and it just scales so well into the end game. I think Summon Tainted kind of came out of left field and just really became a focus for Season 14, and it wasn't even a consideration or on the radar in Season 13 because of how the synergy didn't actually apply and work, which was Blood Boil for Summon Tainted. And now it's just really risen to the top, and it is definitely up there with some of the best builds, and is one of the best builds for the Warlock. I think even compared to the other classes, it really does solid amounts of damage. It's survivable. It's a great option for hardcore play. It is just all around really fantastic, and I'm excited to dive into the Summon Tainted Warlock in the upcoming season. I think if that nerf didn't occur that made the Blood Boil synergy go from 30% damage per level to 20%, if that didn't occur, I would put it at S+ tier with the Fire Warlock. But because of that nerf, I think its damage sort of being reduced by about 33%, it did knock it down a peg. But even with that nerf, I still think it's going to be incredibly powerful, and it can deal with immunes better than the Fire Warlock. So overall, I think Summon Tainted is in a fantastic place, and I think it's just edged out by what I think is going to be the strongest Warlock build for Season 14, which is the Fire Apocalypse Warlock in S+ tier. So overall, I think this is the most powerful build for the Warlock. It does require quite a heavy investment in terms of your gear. You would want an Infinity, you'd want a Fire Sundered Charm, you would want, you know, some crazy helms like a 320 magic circlet with 2 sockets. You'd want like a 3 to fire skills 100 life amulet or something like that. There are going to be some incredibly expensive pieces of gear for this build to really shine, but as we had talked about earlier, it works fantastically for the leveling portion of the game. It does sort of hit a bit of a wall as you enter Hull, but as soon as you can get yourself a Sundered Charm, which will become easier in Season 14, the amount of AoE that you can do with this build, the way that Apocalypse shreds resistances, the screen-wide sort of area of effect that Apocalypse has, the raw damage output that the fire skills for the Warlock have, it's just an incredibly powerful build with the right gear. And honestly, it makes players 8 with the right gear feel like nothing at all. It cuts through it like butter. Again, such good AoE, such good single target. It's only a 60-point skill investment to get the max damage from your skills, and the rest you can diversify and put where you want. It is just so incredibly powerful and survivable, great for hardcore, great for softcore. It's just a super power of a build. It's really incredible how much damage this build can output, and it's a fun playstyle. It does have that delay. Again, I think the Miasma build is a bit more fluid in how it plays, but overall the Fire Apocalypse build is going to, I think, take top honors for Season 14, and it just edges out the Summon Tainted Warlock in my opinion, and bumping it up to S+ tier. So let me know in the comments below what build you are looking at playing for Season 14, what you're going to be leveling with, what build you're going to focus on for your end game, your farming, all of that sort of stuff. I would love to hear it. Please, if you think there should be any changes to this list, let me know in the comments below. Overall, I hope that you found this useful. I am so excited for Season 14. I think it's going to be a incredibly fun season. It's going to be fantastic with all these changes, balancing the Warlock a bit better, and I'm just super excited to dive right in. I hope this video wasn't too long. If you've stuck around to this point, thank you very much, and if you do enjoy this sort of content, please consider subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to join our playthrough groups and the community in general, there's a link to our Discord community in the description of this video. Please join that if you would like. Any subscriptions, likes, shares, all of that sort of good stuff is always so greatly appreciated, and we'll catch you again very soon for some more Mana and Motherboards. Cheers!